Hello, I'm Sabai Tazaz, host of the Stars Daily News podcast, This Matters. Welcome again to the Stars special live stream on US elections 2020. We're talking about some of the key points in the elections that interest Canadians every hour at the top of the hour. And we've been talking to some very interesting guests, so do tune in. And we're trying to bring you a bit of the perspective and analysis beyond just the headlines. And for detailed updates, you can go to our website at thestar.com as well. Meanwhile, let me introduce my next guest here. Sai Sailaja Seshadri is a contributor to The Star. She is a dual Canadian-American citizen of South Asian descent. She also has a bachelor's in political science from Arizona University, and she is extremely passionate about feminism and social justice. And she also has a very interesting experience to share this election season. So welcome, Sai.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you.
So first of all, I think this is your first election as a US citizen and your first time voting here, right? So tell me about that. How do you feel?
Yeah, definitely. So up until September, I was just a Canadian citizen, just became a dual citizen. And I was just a few days before the voter registration deadline here in Texas, I was able to, register, and I voted when early voting started. So it's been really interesting because I've been here in the United States about 8 years now. So I was here when the 2016 elections happened, and it was like I was here, I was 18, but I wasn't a citizen yet. So it was just so tough to be watching all of the election news and being I can't vote. So it was very exciting. I got very lucky that so close to the deadline, I was able to register and go out and vote.
And you voted in Texas, a historically red state. How was that?
Yeah, so I'm in Dallas County, and while Dallas is generally, it leans towards blue, the state itself, Texas is historically red, there's that idea that Texas is super Southern conservative. And it's the thing that's really interesting this year, though, if you're looking at the polls right now, it's so close. There is a good chance that, I don't want to jinx it, but there's a good chance that Texas could go blue. And even if that doesn't end up happening, I think what's really amazing is the state has never gotten so close to being a toss-up before.
Right. It's a lot of observers are saying it's just so close to call right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sai, as a new immigrant to the US and a woman of color, how important is this election season and the act of voting to you, and why?
I think it's so important because, the thing with elections and politics in the United States is it's so tied to every part of our everyday lives. So like you said, especially being a woman of color, there is, there's so many different things to look at. When I think about it, I immediately think about, well, there's the fact that who is in power and the way the economy is will I be able to get a job? And the fact that who is in power will affect my reproductive rights and my healthcare. So I think there's so many things that are continuously intertwined, and going out and voting, I will say, it doesn't end at voting, because there's still so much more that you have to keep doing and so much more that, lawmakers have to keep doing, but it is still the first step, and it's very important.
And we're seeing that too. We're seeing racialized groups coming out in record numbers this election season, like the Black and the Latino communities. How important a role do you think race issues have played this election, considering the reigniting of the BLM and the racism and violence we've been seeing become a part of the discourse in America recently?
I think it's always been very, very important, but especially in these last 4 years, the difference is, while this racial injustice has existed in decades and decades of United States history, in these last 4 years, it's become so much more apparent and obvious. It's not just subtle anymore. So I think as a result of that, so many more people who are people of color, Black people, Hispanics, they're going out to vote, and it makes such a huge difference. The one thing I will say to that, though, is I think those numbers would be even higher if it wasn't for the fact that voter suppression is still so rampant.
Right. And what marks do you think has the Trump presidency has hat on all of this, the way, for example, President Trump handled George Floyd's killing and the aftermath. It seems to have awoken some demons from America's past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like I said, the thing is, these, these crimes, this violence that we see, it's not necessarily new. It's not like it just started happening in the last 4 years. But President Trump has pretty much gone out to his supporters and has said, this violence is okay. You can go ahead and do this. And I think it's really, really scary because the people who were closeted like racists for so long have come out now, and they feel like, well, the president of the United States will back me up and support me, so I can do whatever I want. And it's terrifying.
It's been quite scary. And meanwhile, you're in this unique position to sort of comment about this as well. You're a Canadian as well as an American now. Do you think what's been going on in America has had this blowback effect here in Canada as well, forcing us to talk about racism and race-based issues in our own backyard that we didn't really openly sort of have a discourse on before?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like you said, it's very interesting for me because when I first came out to the United States a few years ago, I was less educated on like Canadian and American history. And, for me, I didn't know about a lot of the things that were going on. But now it's like, it's so obvious. It's very hard to ignore these things that are happening. Like you can't just not talk about it. And I think for Canadians and, just like when you look at Canada now, when the 2016 election happened here, a lot of people started saying, you know what, the US is terrible now, I'm going to move to Canada. And that opened up the conversations about like, well, there's a lot of issues in the United States, but there's also a lot of issues that we need to tackle here in Canada. And it's tough. It's not an easy conversation to have, but I think it's a good thing that we're having that more and more.
Right. Thank you so much for your time, Sai, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for Texas.
Thank you.
So that's all we have for you this hour, but do join us for our last segment at midnight. We'll be talking to our Washington Bureau Chief, Edward Keenan, as the last polls officially close, except for Alaska. So do stay tuned for that.
Thank you. Good night.